Hey, gang, welcome to the Digital Utopia Podcast, episode 42. I'm your host, Frank Coel, and I'm not joined by my co-host, Joseph Freeman, this morning. I am joined by seasoned business and digital strategist, Don Crow. Don, how are you?
Frank, I am outstanding. How are you?
Fantastic. What a great morning so far. Really excited that you're joining today. We're doing a little bit of a shift here, and you are one of our first guests that we're having on the show. We've had a couple of others, but definitely early in the mix here. Super excited to talk to you today about business processes and growth-driven processes that companies lack. And so, thanks for taking the time out and being here with us.
Absolutely, Frank. I am. I'm thrilled to be here. I know internally at Digitopia, everyone has seen the Don Crow show in action. I'm not entirely sure that the rest of the world is ready, but we're going to bring a ton of energy today and a lot of value to our listeners.
Well, I kind of like that. The Don Crow show.
Just
There
naturally
might
fits, right?
be I think there might be a second show in the works. Yeah. Let's think about
Well,
that
let's
one.
get through
Let's
today
think about that
first.
one. Yeah. I'm confident we're going to bring a ton of value today. You're going to bring a ton of value. The show is really all about you today. So I'm going to try to do my best to not talk so much. If Joe is here, he'd be shocked to hear me say that. But I'm going to really make sure
I
that we
can
can get the
imagine.
most from you today, Don. So Don, let's talk
Outstanding.
about the topic today, which is, processes that companies often lack that limit their growth potential. Now, you've been doing this for a long time. As I mentioned, a very seasoned business and digital strategist, and you help companies with the RevOps approach on the HubSpot platform to help them maximize their revenue potential. So knowing about that experience, let's talk about what you're seeing. And tell me what's one of the first processes that you find is missing in a company that is limiting their growth potential?
Yeah. So the one that immediately springs to mind is, to me, it's a very simple one to fix. But there's no natural or consistent feedback loop from the service delivery team or customer service back into marketing. And that creates a whole host of issues that I hope we dive into. But that's the first one that kind of springs to mind.
And so when you find companies that are doing this well, so you find companies are missing a feedback loop between customer service and marketing, what then are companies doing right to create that feedback loop?
Yeah. So, working with HubSpot, one of the easiest solutions that I've seen to implement is use a Net Promoter Score (NPS). You can easily integrate that into HubSpot, and the service team can use that. And if it's well timed, right after you've either answered a service ticket or you've done something specific for that customer, sending them that quick NPS survey. So what that gives you then is you've got a great way to create delighted customers, because obviously if they score you a 9 or a 10 at the top end, that gives you a segmented list that you can then use to start creating that feedback loop with marketing in the form of asking for case studies, asking for testimonials, creating kind of that raving fan club where you give them behind the scenes access, or you exclusive deals and discounts. But you can really optimize using NPS, not only to feed earlier content stages for marketing, but also in creating that customer delight and raving fans. The other thing that NPS
So,
gives
so
you
for our
is, oh, go ahead.
Don, sorry to interrupt you,
No, go right ahead.
but for our listeners, let's talk a little bit about what NPS is in case they don't know. So, can you give a brief description on what NPS is, just in case our listeners don't know what that is?
Absolutely. So NPS is, if you think about it visually, it's typically a scale of 1 to 10. And the leading question becomes like, Frank, how would you rate your interaction with company X today? And, one being I'm completely dissatisfied, all the way up to 10, which is I'm thrilled. And it gives a company leadership a good snapshot of where that customer was at that particular interaction or time and space. Obviously, you can do more with it in terms of um, having a structure in place on when you send that and what interactions you think you'd like to get customer feedback on. But NPS is really to me, a simpler and more user friendly way to do the old school customer satisfaction surveys. You'd be on a call back in the old days when you did call center interactions, and they'd say, "Please stick around at the end of this call for to complete a survey." Or
Right.
in my days at AOL, you'd get emailed this huge survey that most customers didn't take the time to completely fill out unless they were super upset or super happy. So you missed a lot of interactions in between. And that's why I really like NPS. One, because it integrates so well with HubSpot, and two, because it's almost so easy that the customer can, click their answer right away. And obviously, if you want to follow up with them later based on their score, it gives you an opportunity to do that.
Yeah. And of course, outside of a specific transaction where you're reacting and sending this survey based on a very specific experience they've had, it's always a good idea to every now and then survey your database with the kind of the default NPS question, which is how likely are you to refer, a friend or a colleague to
That's right.
our company, to Acme Corp, to our brand, to how likely are you to refer us to, someone else. And so then, that how likely you refer tells you a lot about who your promoters are and who your detractors are. And so, as you mentioned, the 9s and 10s are considered your promoters, and your 7s and below, or 6s and below, are your detractors. And then your 7s and 8s are considered neutrals. And so that kind of helps you understand like what percentage you have in each of those camps. And then there's a formula we won't get into of like how you subtract one for the other to get your actual NPS score. You can Google it and look up that formula. But that's
Absolutely.
the idea, is that if you haven't done this, I would encourage you to email your database today and just ask that simple question. How likely are, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to refer our company to a colleague? And,
Hmm.
a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being like, absolutely, I love you guys. And 1 being like, I wouldn't refer you guys to the devil himself. Right. Like
That's right.
that's kind of the range. And then like, just see where you're at. Ask that question. If you don't have anything built in based on a specific moment or a specific action they've taken.
That's right. Absolutely.
So keep talking through this idea now. So you talked about, NPS. What else are people doing? Or what else can you do with the NPS besides, start to segment a list for, who those people are for testimonials and case studies and whatnot?
Well, that was a great way to tee that one up for me, Frank, because that's exactly where I was going. Is that the companies who do this well, they use NPS to help with their customer segmentation and lead scoring. So basically, they take the results, as you said, you email your database, you ask that question, how likely are you to refer us? That's a great place to start. And then based on that, obviously, if you look at your 9 and 10s, you can use that to kind of model and build lookalike audiences. You can start list building to kind of improve improve the score, but mainly, I mean, if you do it correctly, you're trying to make the customer happy, right? So you want to improve their experience with your
Right.
product or service. So anybody that you segment in that 1 to 6 range, you create a process to, all right, what do we figure out what their pain points are, where we're not meeting that, where we're falling short, and why they won't recommend us, and then you work against that to improve those scores. The other one that I think is awesome is it's just, you get such great feedback that you can then use to improve your product or service. Because, Frank, as you know, there's no amount of great content marketing that's going to overcome a poor product or service. It's like when you go to a restaurant, right? You might forgive average service if the food is great, but if the service is average and the food is awful, there's nothing that you can do in that restaurant that's going to improve that experience, right? And so it's the same concept here of
Right.
using that to improve your product or service, and then that's going to just feed back into your overall content marketing mix. And then I think just simply
One of my
putting,
favorite sayings. Sorry, Don. We've got a little bit of tripping over each
gave me
other
a
here, but
great
one
chance
of my
to get a
favorite
sip of
sayings
water.
around the point around the point you just made is the phrase that says, marketing is simply the tax you pay for not being remarkable. And when you look at it that way, you're like, wow, damn. Like, if I'm having to do a ton of marketing just to generate interest in what I'm doing, maybe what I'm doing isn't all that remarkable. And I
That's right.
love that you mentioned the idea of product improvement, because that's really what you should be using this kind of feedback for.
Absolutely. And back to the NPS part, it gives you a very focused and segmented way to get in there and ask more specifics if you've got a detractor, right? And it may be that they're happy with the marketing, sales, and service side. It's that they're dissatisfied with the product. So it's a natural segue to kind of have that deeper dive conversation.
That's awesome. Cool. Is there, before we wrap up this idea of any NPS, is there anything else that you might recommend, around NPS and how it can be used to start to create that feedback loop?
Well, I think, it's fairly simple to implement. It's a lot more thought that has to go into the strategy behind it, and how you're going to use that to really segment and work with your database and your customers. But simply putting that processes in place gives that main point of contact, a connection point with the client, and that's allows you to then do those things like ask for reviews and feedback and participate in case studies or be a guest on your podcast. I mean, it's exposure for them and it's exposure for you. So it's a very simple step that's often overlooked, but the companies that we work with that do this well, I mean, they have a really structured NPS program in place and they actively use it to make things better for everyone.
Okay, so Don, if people wanted to launch an NPS and they wanted guidance beyond just Googling it and doing it themselves, they'd say they either have HubSpot or let's say they don't have a solution. How can people get in touch with you? Like, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you to learn a bit more about setting up NPS?
Well, that's a fantastic question. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn and Twitter, but you can always find me through the digitopia.agency website.
Okay.
And service is one of those things that I am very passionate about and love helping companies with, whether it's developing a process, optimizing their process, installing NPS, or even, refining and optimizing their existing like customer satisfaction surveys.
Okay, great. So that website is digitopia.agency, www.digitopia.agency. Shameless self-plug there. Let's jump into this next process that we were talking about this morning. And this one got me really excited. It's a topic I'm passionate about, around sales nurturing. Talk to us about sales nurturing and why you're finding that to be a missing process and what does that mean?
Yeah, and I tell you frequently how I hear this is we'll hear companies say things like, well, we'll find that we can see prospects or visitors that come to our website, they download our content, they watch our webinars, they check out our infographics, they're consuming all of our great content. Um, and so they're exhibiting buying behavior, but then they say, well, I'm not ready right now. Or the salesperson hears something other than a firm yes. That person feels abandoned. And instead of, you know, they're not going to wait around. They're now armed with all this information and great content that you've given them, but they end up going with a competitor because by then they've already raised their hand, but maybe they weren't ready right then because it was a budget authority need or timing issue. There was something there, but sales didn't follow up, and sales had no process in place to put that prospect into a nurture queue. And so, of course, they end up going to a competitor because at that point, they've already done all their homework. They know exactly what they want. So they go to that competitor hand raised, and that competitor can then jump on it. So I think,
Yeah, this is
you know,
one of my pet peeves with sales teams today is that they just expect it to be handed ready now, ready to sign kind of leads and opportunities. And, this idea of nurturing isn't just a marketing thing. Like salespeople should be nurturing their own personal, list of SQLs that aren't ready for that opportunity stage. And I think you nailed it, right? Which is essentially when you have an SQL that doesn't have all four of BANT, budget, authority, need, and timing, typically it's timing, right? So
right.
like typically an SQL has BAN, but not T. So if they had T, they'd be an opportunity. So your SQLs are your BANs, right? Your bands. And you should be nurturing personally, a select list of SQLs that you personally keep on in touch with. And yes, marketing can continue to do the automated nurturing, but you should absolutely be leveraging tools with automation. You should you should be in touch with those people. This is one of my big pet peeves is salespeople need to nurture and create these relationships. So when they are ready, as you mentioned, when they're ready, they haven't forgotten about you and then just go to someone else whose Google ad popped up.
That's right. I mean, and I love that concept of, as as we mentioned, like the companies that do this well, like those sales reps, they have kind of their own list, right? That they're responsible for, in addition to the ones that they're assigned that are kind of new coming through that maturation of the contact from MQL on up. And so I think what's important there is knowing the length of your sales cycle. So, for example, if your
Okay.
sales cycle is 6 months long, it does you zero good to develop a nurture series that's only 2 months or 4 months, right? I mean, you've got to be ready to go the entire 6 months for some of these folks. And so there's where marketing and sales have to be in aligned on what content that they have ready for those SDRs to reach back out to kind of keep you or keep that prospect in the loop, stay engaged with them, stay in front of them. And it's got to be around that original pain point and what, made them raise their hand in the first place. Or you're basically recycling content that got them in the door, but it's no longer of use to them because they already know that stuff. At this point, it's got to be much
Right.
more high touch, highly personalized. And again, with sales and marketing being alignment, and if they're talking, marketing can help develop that content that's unique or feels more personal to that the salesperson is using in their nurture queue.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally understand that. We were also talking about automation. Talk to me about automation and how that can and cannot be used and when it should and shouldn't be used.
Yeah, that's a great point because I think when sales leaders hear the term sales nurture queue, they immediately think, oh, we have a tool that we can use to automate all of that and just put it on autopilot. And every 2 weeks, this person's going to get a blog post, or this person's going to get a white paper, or this person's going to get some piece of content. And I think that's the wrong approach. I think that there are some things, sure, that you can automate based on that customer's behavior and what gets triggered as part of that process. But it should always feel just like you're reaching back out to a friend you haven't spoken to in maybe 6 or 8 months and giving them, something of value. So automation has to be done, I think, wisely so that it's automated to maximize the efficiency of your sales team, but to the customer or the prospect, it feels very natural and it still feels just like that one-to-one interaction.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's a great point. And it kind of to what I mentioned a moment ago, which is, if marketing is going to continue to do its nurturing with those blog posts and whatnot, then you as the sales rep have to be in there with some sort of more personalized value, right? You have to show like, here's why I'm valuable to you, because otherwise, to your point, the marketing nurturing that kind of provides, I call it the ground cover. It provides ground cover, but it doesn't replace that relationship building that you as a sales rep are supposed to be doing.
Yeah, and I think the automation piece and those engagements. I mean, you got to track and measure everything. Like if the emails aren't being opened, then you're missing something, right? You've either lost that person, or your subject lines aren't spot on, or you've over automated this entire process and you're losing them. So you can't just, and that's like we said, the people who do this well, they've got every step of this nailed down, right? I mean, they're tracking and measuring everything so that when they start seeing the customer kind of fall off, they know like, all right, we've got to re-engage because what we're doing now is not working. They don't just leave it on some automation cycle that runs until it's comes to a conclusion and then scratch their head and say, well, we did all these things, but why didn't we close this person?
Right. Yeah. What are some simple steps for people to get started with better sales nurturing? What are some simple things they can do and take action on today?
Talk to your frontline sales folks. Ask them what's being said. What are the objections? What are the common things that are preventing opportunities from closing? And then sit down with sales and marketing leadership and just say, okay, what content do we have that we could potentially repurpose so that it feels personal, but develop the content plan, and then back to my first point, which is know the length of your sales cycle and develop automation accordingly that's going to stay in front of that prospect on their schedule, on something that you can track and measure over the length of that entire sales cycle. Now, perfect scenario, Frank, 3 months in and a 6 month sales cycle, something has changed, typically the timing, and that person comes back in. But you need to look at it from the approach of this could be a 6 month process.
Right, right. Yeah, it's a great point. It's the same thing with when people launch new marketing campaigns or new initiatives, and the CEO takes well, we're going to invest, but we're going to give it 90 days. But yet the sales cycle is 6 or 9 months. It's like, okay. So we all agree nothing's going to happen, right? Like we all just agree on that. Let's talk about this third process that we were discussing earlier today. The third one that you found to be missing in a lot of companies, and that it's critical.
Yeah, and this one, this is one of my favorite workshops that I do with our clients, is what we call the technical lifecycle journey map, where we literally look at every step from visitor, subscriber, lead, MQL, SQL, and on up the chain. And we just get all of the leaders in the room, sales, marketing, service, C-level, whatever. And we just say, what does the term subscriber mean to you? What does lead mean to you? What does MQL mean to you? And we just start at that very basic level of definitions. So, I think I'm probably the only one old enough to remember this exercise, but in elementary school, we had not necessarily my favorite thing, but it's like a glossary sheet, and you had to, fill out the definition of words. And where that applies in this sense in the RevOps framework is once you get everybody in alignment on what all of those different stages are that the contact is going to go through, then because people are going to change, right? You're going to have turnover, whether they get promoted or they move to a different department or for whatever reason they leave. Tools are constantly updating, so your platform is going to change. But if you're people and you have a process that's in alignment on what each of those definitions are, then you can dig a little bit deeper and say, okay, what behavioral triggers are we observing from these contacts at each different stage? What are our ideal customer profile or client profiles look like? What are the demographics that we need? Then you start developing better MQLs. And a better MQL is going to give your sales team a leg up, because now they know when they reach in, they know exactly who they're talking to, what that pain point is, and what is the best solution to offer, which and then in turn creates better SQLs and so on. So I love doing that exercise because it's so simple, and you would think that companies of all sizes would have that down. Like, what is an MQL? Most of them don't have a very clearly defined definition of that. Or what we typically see is sales has one definition and marketing has another. And there's a big disconnect and a friction
That's often
point.
the case.
Absolutely. And so then what does that do is, how do you have a legit service level agreement between marketing and sales on how many MQLs they're going to get each month or each quarter if they're not even on the same page with what the definition of an MQL is, right?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think in a previous episode, we had a discussion about these different life cycle stages and suggestions for how to, map those. But once those are defined, Don, my assumption would be that you're going to get those implemented into the various softwares and set up the automations to then tag people when they reach that criteria. How specifically then do you see people using those definitions once they're defined?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we do a lot of this with our fast start programs here at Digitopia when we work with clients, as far as helping them either set up a new instance of HubSpot or just completely starting over. And by starting over, I mean, you see big companies who aren't in alignment and have over automated everything. And so back to that very building block basic level of getting them on the same page with the definition, and then crafting workflows that are based around those actual definitions. So it's everything from, you know, who in the sales team is going to manually put eyes on those MQLs to say, yep, this prospect or this MQL looks perfect. It fits ICP. It fits everything that we're looking for. We're going to manually kind of move them over to SQL. But that's the automation piece, right? And that's the setup of your platform. But it has to start with that agreement on definition. Otherwise, you've got sales reaching way too far back in and pulling potentially subscribers and leads who we know aren't going to want to talk on the phone yet,
Right.
probably aren't going to answer an email or be ready for any contact. So using those definitions to define how your internal tools are going to work, how your internal processes are going to work as far as moving that contact all the way through each of those life cycle stages. I think as simple as it sounds, that exercise is, like I said, one of my favorites in our Fast Start program, and it's the one that generates the most discussion. Maybe buyer personas are another one that generate a lot of discussion, but that technical lifecycle journey map really gets everybody involved. And you'll oftentimes hear, you know, sales, marketing, and service leaders laugh and go, well, that explains everything, right? We've never been in agreement on what an MQL is or what an SQL is or what behavioral triggers we should be looking for and what that should trigger in our tool setup.
Yeah, I love what you said about SLAs between marketing and sales. And if you think about, you know, when marketing generates contacts in the database and they eventually become MQLs, that's the point at which marketing is saying, hey, we're certifying these leads are now passed over to you, sales, and they're worth looking at. We're not saying they're opportunities. We're not saying they're hot ready now, but we feel that at a distance, they're worth looking into. And so I've
That's
often
right.
used that kind of analogy with people when describing that what's the difference between MQL and SQL. Well, an MQL is someone you see across the street. You can't talk to them, but they look qualified. And then SQL is like they cross and you ask them a few basic questions and you go like, okay, yeah, I've validated what I could view from afar. So that's what marketing is doing. And so that transition, that handoff is a great spot for that service level agreement between marketing and sales, as you mentioned. So, yeah, that I think these are basic things that we're talking about, and I think they're wildly helpful if organizations just commit to getting aligned on the same page and putting those agreements in place. We're talking, you know, a 2-paragraph agreement.
That's right. And stay aligned, right? It's important to get this exercise kind of out of the way and get started, but you have to, you know, a company that we work with now, that they have a really, really cool round robin approach where they get together quarterly to just kind of review, hey, what is the quality of the SQLs that we've gotten? What are the quality MQLs we've gotten? And if you've got really solid professionals in each of those roles, your marketing leader should be a little bit embarrassed if they're not giving sales quality marketing qualified leads every month, right? Like, you know, that should be a point of pride. Is everything we have set up is so awesome that I am absolutely proud and happy to certify these MQLs and hand them over to sales.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's great. You know, obviously the end result of all of this is that, you know, we're improving the customer experience, but at the same time, we're also streamlining the revenue engine, right? I mean, that's the result of what you've been talking about with these processes. And I'm sure we could talk, you know, for hours about many more processes, but I like these 3 that you pointed out. And I think that, you know, when companies commit to inputting process related to the growth engine, the revenue engine, which by the way is aligned with the customer journey, right? Like your
That's
growth
right.
and that I often call it the macro funnel. Like that is the customer journey. And like, what are the points in that journey at which they can influence positively on your brand, on your business, you know, through opportunity, through revenue, through referrals, through, you know, whatever it might be. What is that macro funnel? And so having process for each of those just makes sense. It streamlines your operation. But again, most importantly, you're really improving the customer experience. I mean, that is the most important thing.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that's the beauty, You think about the art and science of RevOps and that RevOps director in any company. That's ultimately what they're doing, right? I mean, the growth and the that you see is just really the end result of taking care of that customer at every stage along the way, and having, like we said, these are the three processes that kind of jump out to me that I see most companies either they've tried it, they haven't fully committed, or they think they're there. And it doesn't matter what size, flat organizations, large organizations, they struggle with some of these handoffs, and like we said, the first one being, NPS is a great solution, but it ultimately is because there's no feedback loop from service back to marketing, and then the handoff between sales and marketing, there's a hiccup there. And it kind of comes back to this third point, which was the technical lifecycle journey map that we do with clients is, let's all get in a room and get agreement on the definitions and what should be happening in our people, process, and platform to make this work.
Yeah, that's great. We're now out of time, but I do want to make sure that we point people to this life cycle journey mapping that can help you with these life cycle definitions. And so if you go to www.digitopia.agency, we have available on the website there a life cycle map. More specifically, it's /lifecycle-map. You're probably not going to remember that. You might be in the car. www.digitopia.agency. And you can also go to buildingyourdigitalutopia.com to learn more about everything that we talk about in this podcast, the book, a lot of the other templates and assets that we have. In fact, we should make the lifecycle journey map also available as some of the tools on buildingyourdigitalutopia.com, since that's where we often push people to. So we'd love to hear from you after you get this document. Let us know what you think of it. If you have questions, the lifecycle journey mapping tool, as Don mentioned, is a tool that Don actually uses in his day-to-day with clients and helping them figure these things out. Folks, thanks for joining us. This has been fun. Don, thanks for joining us today. I'm hoping you're going to join me on another episode.
I hope so too.
All right, folks, you have a great one, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.